August 7th, 1942, the Solomon Islands. A few minutes after 1 in the afternoon, somewhere between Rabaul and the chaos unfolding over Guadalcanal, 18 Mitsubishi Zeros from the Painan Air Group cut through the tropical clouds and descended toward the southern coast of the island. What they saw below was supposed to be impossible. American transport ships, American destroyers, American Marines storming the beaches. The first major American amphibious assault of the Pacific War was underway, and it had caught the Imperial Japanese Navy completely off guard. Among the Japanese pilots was a lean, quiet man with the bloodline of a samurai family stretching back centuries. His name was Saburo Sakai. He was not an officer. He carried no academy prestige, only the rank of petty officer first class and a combat record thick enough to intimidate most commissioned pilots around him. Sakai had already fought across China, the Philippines, Java, and New Guinea. Allied intelligence officers had started marking the tail numbers of his Zero on recognition charts because the pilot flying it almost never lost. Leading the formation above him was Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, the airborne combat leader of the Tainan Air Group, one of the deadliest fighter units in the Imperial Navy. What happened over the Solomon Islands in the next 48 hours would expose a weakness inside the Japanese air arm that could never truly be repaired again. At first, the battle unfolded exactly the way the Japanese expected. The American F4F Wildcats fought cautiously. They attacked quickly, fired a burst, then broke away. Sakai himself shot down a Wildcat that morning after a brutal 20-minute dogfight against U.S. Navy pilot Lieutenant James Pugh Sutherland of Fighting Squadron 5. Sutherland's guns had jammed early in the engagement, probably damaged during an earlier bomber interception. But instead of retreating, he stayed in the fight. He couldn't shoot, but he could still maneuver. Again and again, he turned inside, attacking Zeros, forcing them to overshoot. Sakai joined the engagement from above. Unaware the American pilot was effectively defenseless, the duel became one of the longest individual dogfights of the Pacific War. Sakai later admitted he had never seen an aircraft absorb punishment like the Wildcat. He poured more than 200 rounds into Sutherland's fighter before finally landing a 20-meter cannon shell beneath the left wing. Root, the Wildcat erupted in flames. Sutherland bailed out into the jungle below with 11 wounds and somehow survived, hidden and protected by Solomon Islanders until he could be evacuated weeks later. Sakai returned to base with another victory, painted beneath his cockpit, but also with a troubling realization. These Americans were different. Somewhere over Guadalcanal, the Wildcats had begun fighting in a way the Japanese had never seen before. Lieutenant Commander Nakajima noticed it first. He landed back at Rabaul shaken and unusually quiet. During one engagement, he had lined up behind a Wildcat for an easy kill when another American fighter suddenly appeared from the side, charging directly toward him with guns blazing. Nakajima barely escaped. The attack had come from an angle that should not have been possible. Sakai watched his commander climb down from the cockpit, and trembling against the ladder, and understood immediately. Something fundamental had changed. In the barracks at Rabaul that week, Japanese pilots kept asking each other the same question: who taught the Americans to fight like this? The Imperial Navy's fighter elite had always viewed American pilots as predictable. Inferior aircraft, inferior training, inferior aggression, and now suddenly, two American fighters working together could defeat even the best Japanese ace. Every time. The answer to that mystery began thousands of miles away in a rented house in Coronado, California, months before Pearl Harbor. Soft-spoken U.S. Navy pilot named John S. Thatch had been staring at an intelligence report describing a terrifying new Japanese fighter, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The report claimed the aircraft could outclimb, outturn and outrange anything America possessed, and most of it was true. The Japanese Zero was the product of an entire philosophy. The Imperial Navy had spent years building perhaps the most elite fighter pilot training system in the world. Young cadets endured brutal selection standards. Only a tiny percentage survived graduation. The men who emerged from that pipeline were extraordinary aviators. Pilots like Sakai trained constantly in aerial gunnery, carrier landings, formation discipline, and dogfighting. Japanese doctrine taught that air combat was ultimately a duel between warriors. The superior pilot won. The weaker pilot died. The Zero itself reflected that philosophy perfectly. Designed by engineer Jiro Horikoshi, the aircraft sacrificed armor and durability for pure maneuverability. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Minimal pilot protection. Ultralight construction. In exchange, the Zero could turn tighter, climb faster, and fly farther than almost any Allied fighter early in the war. The results in 1941 and early 1942 were catastrophic for the Allies. Over the Philippines, Malaya, Java, and the Indian Ocean, Japanese pilots tore through Allied aircraft with horrifying efficiency. By early 1942, American pilots were under strict orders. Never turn with a Zero, dive away, run, survive, if possible. That was the reality John Thatch faced in 1941. When he took command of Fighting Squadron 3 in San Diego, Thatch was not famous for daring flying. What made him dangerous was something quieter, he thought, deeply. When the intelligence bulletin about the Zero landed on his desk, he understood immediately that American pilots could not win by fighting the Japanese on their terms. So he went home. At night, sitting at his kitchen table, Thatch began experimenting with matchsticks. The matchsticks became airplanes. The wood grain became the sky. Again and again, he recreated combat scenarios, trying to solve a simple problem. How could slower American fighters survive against superior Japanese aircraft? For weeks, he tested formations during the day over San Diego Bay and returned home each evening to rearrange the matchsticks. Eventually, he realized the standard American three-plane formation was flawed. Wingmen were too focused on maintaining formation to protect one another effectively, so Thatch simplified everything. Pairs, two fighters supporting each other. Instead of blindly following a leader, then he developed something even more important. Two pairs of fighters, flying side by side. If a Zero attacked one pair, the second pair immediately turned inward. The defending aircraft crossed paths, forcing the attacking Japanese pilot directly into the guns of the supporting fighters. It was elegant, simple, deadly. The trap depended not on individual brilliance, but on teamwork and timing. The maneuver became known as the Thatch Weave. Before the war, Thatch tested it personally against one of the Navy's most talented young pilots, Ensign Butch O'Hare. Hare attacked repeatedly from every possible angle, while Thatch's defending aircraft flew at half power to simulate the Wildcat's disadvantages against the Zero. Every single time, the weave worked. After landing, O'Hare reportedly walked over and told him, "Skipper, it really worked." The true test came at the Battle of Midway, on June 4, 1942. Thatch led 6 Wildcats escorting vulnerable American torpedo bombers toward the Japanese fleet. Outnumbered and attacked by waves of Zeros, the American formation should have been destroyed. Instead, Thatch improvised the weave in actual combat. A young, inexperienced pilot named Robert Dibb became the bait, while Thatch crossed inward behind him, again and again. Japanese pilots committed to the attack, again and again. They flew directly into American gunfire. The tactic worked exactly as Thatch had envisioned months earlier at his kitchen table. Within weeks, the weave spread throughout the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps. Marine pilots flying from battered Henderson Field on Guadalcanal adopted it immediately. Carrier squadrons drilled it constantly. Even dive bombers began using variations of the tactic during return flights. And across the Pacific, Japanese pilots kept encountering the same impossible problem: Two American aircraft fighting as one. Then came the moment that nearly killed Saburo Sakai himself. Late on August 7th, Sakai spotted a formation below him and dove to attack. He thought they were Wildcats. They were actually SBD Dauntless dive bombers. As Sakai lined up his shot, rear gunner Harold Jones opened fire. A bullet smashed through Sakai's canopy, tore into his skull, blinded him in one eye, and partially paralyzed his body. His Zero spiraled toward the ocean. Most pilots would have died instantly. Sakai somehow recovered control, half-blind, bleeding heavily, and barely conscious. He flew nearly 5 hours back to Rabaul across open ocean before. Collapsing after landing, he survived. Many others did. And this is where the deeper story begins. The Imperial Japanese Navy never truly developed an answer to the thatch weave because the problem was larger than tactics. It was cultural Japanese fighter doctrine, revolved around the individual ace. Their entire training system was designed to create exceptional pilots rather than sustainable teams. America chose a different path. The United States focused on teamwork, replaceable systems, large-scale pilot production, and tactical cooperation. The Japanese created elite warriors. The Americans created a machine. As the war dragged on, the difference became fatal. Experienced Japanese veterans were kept in combat until they died. The United States rotated veteran pilots home to train new generations. By 1943, most of Japan's elite pre-war aviators were gone, killed over Guadalcanal. Killed at Santa Cruz, killed in the Philippine Sea. Their replacements arrived with less training, less experience, and almost no chance of survival. Meanwhile, American production exploded. Thousands of new pilots entered combat already trained in mutual support. Tactics like the weave, the F4F Wildcat eventually achieved an impressive combat record despite being technically inferior to the Zero. Its successor, the F6F Hellcat, utterly dominated Japanese naval aviation. By the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the imbalance had become catastrophic. Poorly trained Japanese pilots were being slaughtered by coordinated American formations flying superior tactics and superior aircraft. What John Thatch had really invented was not just a maneuver. He had proven something larger. Two coordinated pilots could consistently defeat one brilliant ace. No matter how talented the ace was, that principle changed air combat forever. Variations of the weave were later used in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Even modern fighter doctrine still teaches the same foundations: mutual support, shared awareness. Never fight alone. Many of the men who helped prove the tactic never lived to see the war. Butch O'Hare disappeared during a night combat mission in 1943. His body was never recovered. Robert Dibb, the inexperienced pilot who helped execute the weave at Midway, died in a training accident in 1944 after becoming an ace himself. Saburo Sakai survived the war and later became a vocal critic of Japanese militarism. In 1983, Sakai met Harold Jones, the American rear gunner who had nearly killed him over Guadalcanal 41 years earlier. The two old veterans shook hands peacefully. Sakai even brought the bullet-pierced helmet he had worn that day in 1942, and John Thatch. He went on to become a four-star admiral, but the thing he is remembered for most was born not in a laboratory, not in a war room, but at a kitchen table in California with a handful of matchsticks and a simple idea: no pilot survives alone.